Literary Reading Part II, Literary Study. Literary reading is a specialized form of meaning-making that occurs through reading. Not only do we read literary text aesthetically as art, as Rosenblatt argues, but also the texts themselves are intended to be read this way. As Robert Scholes observes, such texts are formally literary. The techniques employed in such texts, such as the use of symbolism in fiction, poetry, and even film and video games, demand aesthetic reading strategies. We can, of course, read aesthetic text for information, but if we stop there, we've missed 95% of the potential meaning. Rosenblatt uses the term efferent to refer to reading that occurs for information. When readers read for information, they observe or carry away the facts of the reading. They may also make inferences and draw conclusions based on these facts, but they don't address them in an aesthetic way. In a sense, efferent reading is two-dimensional, while aesthetic has a third dimension. In reading literary texts, efferent reading is the first step. We observe the two dimensions, gather the facts of the texts. Then, through aesthetic reading, we do something magical. We allow the facts of the text to form experiences in our imaginations. When we encounter the first sentence of Virginia Woolf's novel, Mrs. Dalloway, for example, Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself, we are launched into Mrs. Dalloway's world. We hear her speaking, perhaps to a servant who would normally have shopped for her, or to her husband who had wanted to do something special for her. We have a sense, perhaps, that Mrs. Dalloway is heading out the door to get the flowers, and is maybe even now poised on the doorstep. And perhaps we have a sense that the flowers themselves are important to knowing this woman. If Mrs. Dalloway were going to buy a transistor radio, we would have a different sense of Mrs. Dalloway. The fact that she's buying flowers resonates with the beauty of living things and the luxury of having the time and money to invest in bringing them into the home. In a single aesthetic sentence, the entire world opens. This three-dimensional quality that draws readers into an experience is the power of the literary text. As scholar Elizabeth Long argues, we have a cultural impression of readers as solitary, even lonely. Pictures of readers may even suggest that they are suffering rather than having fun. If only we could capture the adventure happening inside the mind. But reading isn't really as lonely as the stereotype suggests. At its most fundamental level, reading establishes a community between the author, who may be long dead, and the living reader, a community that may help that reader feel not so lonely in the world. Reading also creates community when readers talk with one another about their reading. We might have a conversation about a book or film we just completed. We might be required to do so in a classroom. We might choose to join other community members in a book group. We might post a review of the book on a site like Goodreads.com. We might engage in the action of an online video game with other players separated by oceans. We might write and share our own fan fiction. We might collaborate to produce a film based on a screenplay, etc., etc. When we look beyond the stereotype of the lonely reader, we find that reading is all about sharing ideas and experiences with others. Because no two readers are the same, literary texts have at least as many meanings as there are readers. Readers may even experience a text differently when rereading as an older person. Thus, the power of the literary text is multiplied when readers communicate with other readers about the text. Good classroom reading communities attempt to approximate reading communities that occur more naturally in the world by valuing the contributions of all members. Literary scholars operate in a specialized reading community focused on capturing and analyzing the observation, inference, and conclusion that drive the imaginative world-building of literary reading. They analyze artistic techniques like character and symbolism that contribute to this literary world-building in an effort to explain how the imaginary world is constructed and to explore why it is important. They endeavor to express their own unique reading experiences and to indicate how those experiences build on the experiences of others. They do this orally and in published writing. When students engage in literary interpretation in a classroom, they are being asked to approximate the work of literary scholars, reading not only for information and for aesthetic experience, but also for appreciation of literature as part of a literary and scholarly tradition. Attention to literary technique and criticism may at first seem to ruin literature, but with practice, literary interpretation can enhance the intellectual and emotional pleasure in reading. While any text could be read in a literary way, literary interpretation is often more profitable with literary text designed not only for literary pleasure, but also for literary and philosophical appreciation. Often such texts have passed what Charles E. Bressler calls the test of time criterion, in that they have lasted across generations. I would argue that the key components of literature with a capital L are the artistic techniques that make fictional experiences resonant with meaning, and the intertextuality that links the contents and techniques of current texts to a genealogy of texts going back to the classical period. Texts that possess artistic elements and intertextuality are simply more interesting to analyze. These qualities are the reason why literature courses focus less on popular genre fiction like romance or mystery, and more on texts that have become or might become classics. The intertextuality of literary texts is why aspiring writers must read. Writers can't just express themselves. While doing so is valuable for the writers and for readers who find the content of their writing meaningful, their writing won't get larger traction unless it's embedded in the ongoing literary dialogue. Writers seeking success must be familiar with existing texts, understand their importance, and plan for their own writing to use or discard their techniques. For this reason, study of literature is vital not only for readers, but for creative writers. Literature study benefits not only readers and writers, but individuals, students, family members, employees, employers, and citizens, because it can enhance the following. Communication. All reading is fundamentally about ideas shared between writers and readers and among groups of readers. Pleasure. Grasping the artistic elements of a favorite text can enhance the pleasure of reading it and rereading it. Understanding of others and ourselves. Through entering into the lives of characters, we learn to think outside the confines of our lived experience, which also aids in self-reflection. Artistic creation. Like other forms of artistic expression, reading is an imaginative experience involving the response to beauty. Intuitive thinking grounds major discoveries that extend understanding beyond the known and into the unknown. Preservation. Through literary study, we keep the books we love alive and continue the scholarly dialogue that gives us intellectual pleasure. Intellectual skills. The meaning-making involved in interpretation demands the critical thinking strategies that range from simple tasks, such as demonstrating knowledge of literary terms and comprehension of textual content, to more complex tasks such as applying theory to literature and film, analyzing text for patterns and meanings, synthesizing information from various sources to draw new conclusions, and evaluating texts, theories, and interpretations.